Gustavo for his presence. Good morning. The obituary of development that we wrote 25 years ago with Wolfgang Sachs as the editor was a timely one and rigorous against one might think and what Wolfgang Sachs wrote in 2010 for the new edition of the Dictionary of Development. The company died back then, during the 1980s. The corpse stinks, even though it is still being displayed by government, international institutions, and some people in the academia who are clueless. Nobody can say seriously nowadays that the American way of life is something that can be adopted by the world. Nobody can pretend to say that the hegemony that the United States tried to stabilize with the symbol of development and the idea of underdevelopment in 1949 is something that could still be current. In Latin America, we, as of the 1980s, have been in the waters of post-development trying to take our own path. With the maturity of this experience, we can now connect with people who, from the perspective of degrowth, are moving in a direction that seems to match ours. Many people have tried to find a place within the current regime, but many others, like us, we are seriously trying to create a world that can house different worlds, as Zapatero says, beyond patriarchy, capitalism, the nation-state, and democracy. The storm that the Zapatist movement foresaw was much worse than we had expected. It turned out to be literally lethal. The new social class that was named during the 1990s with the Zapatistas, the social class of the disposable, those who won't be used by the capital neither now nor ever, they are suffering the most. The disposables are being disposed of. The obscene contability of death is multiplied, and if you combine it with the amount of people who are kidnapped or disappear, or people who are condemned to a life that is unbearable as slaves or sicarios, and all of the people who have been reduced to a process of slow agony under unbearable conditions. Resisting has been of the utmost importance to do whatever is possible to stop the plundering. The end of capitalism didn't turn out to be good news. It was not the soft extinction that Keynes had said would happen in 2010, or the slow process Bernstein had anticipated, for which the terminal phase of capitalism started in '68, but that could last 100 years. It was a falling into barbarity. The capitalistic mode of production became a way in which to dispossess. Private property comes from depriving, taking what other people possess. It was created with the enclosure of the communities that created the new needy person. Those who needed nothing, who had an autonomous subsistence, started to need everything: food, education, health, and most of all, employment. They could only survive in their new condition by serving the capital. That is why it was called the originary accumulation. Dispossession became capital. That's what gave it origin. So plundering never stopped. It was a part of capitalism. But the savage dispossession that we now see something new, because what's plundered cannot be transformed into capital. Extractivism, as we call it in Latin America, be it mining, financial, urban, agriculture, or labor, the wave of plundering that is taking what it can, materials, rights, life conditions, the plundering weight that is created, and accumulation is not an originary or amplified accumulation, is no longer capital accumulation. As we'll know, even though we don't always wish to acknowledge it, we are facing the catastrophe of an exacerbated patriarchy in which the hate towards life that was always part of patriarchy is becoming a system and it is killing everything on its wake, as it was described yesterday on this conference. Millions of people all throughout the world are making an enormous effort to resist. They resort to all sorts of resources to stop the horror. There are some people who still believe that by getting hold of the state apparatus is a way in which to have a revolution or a relevant change. And I don't want to disqualify those efforts who are also represented in this conference. But sometimes we are confused. What to do, for instance, when 3 million workers in Spain are marching to say that there's something worse than being exploited by capitalism, and that is not to be exploited by capitalism, that they cannot survive without a job, those jobs that won't exist further. What to do when the vice president of Bolivia, the Marxist vice president, says that it is true that the capitalistic structures have been reinforced and that they are bringing transnational capital, but now the surplus is being divided amongst the people, and that is the only way in which they can make use of the enormous lithium reserves. What to do when we're told that the people finally took over power because a vigorous minority defined the party that will rule the legislative and executive power in Mexico, and a minority will be making all the important decisions. So we are divided by them. In Mexico, there are at least 3 great groups. Here, amongst ourselves, aside from the groups that exist above us, a certain number of millions, not as big as you might think that the Messiah has arrived, and it is time to follow the Messiah and wait for the blessings he will spread up amongst us. Other millions acknowledge the limitations of the circumstances of the apparatus and of those people who are arriving at power, but they believe that they have opened a window of opportunity. They believe it is important to acknowledge the complexity of the times and to take advantage of all of the openings that the new government will offer. And finally, there are other millions, more than you could think of, some of which considered that they have contributed to the elimination of the old regime, but they feel threatened by the new one, which is just starting to wear shoes that are not theirs, to prolong the despotism of a patriarchal capitalistic design that is still that. In spite of this crude, ironic tone I use, I do not wish to say those efforts are fruitless. The time of the dogmas and the unique paths is behind us. I just want to set a boundary. There are many of us who have abandoned all of those beliefs, and in the middle of the storm, we have been walking under the path of autonomy in the creation of a new world. Half of a century ago, Ivan Illich told us that the Prometheic seal, that starting of the Second World War took the shape of development and growth, that seal has eclipsed hope. Survival of the human species, as Ivan said, depends on describing hope as a social strength, and he was right. That's what it is about. It is not only about discovering it, abandoning all of the prosaic seals of growth and development. It's not only about embracing it to prevent it from freezing, but it's about transforming them into social forces. And autonomy is the art of organizing hope. As a way of resisting, hope comes from far away. It would be colonizing the past to place a label on the fights of resistance to all of the colonization process, but it is evident that they had an autonomic character in the sense of the world, and the current fights of the original peoples are inscribed within this tradition. The word autonomy, acquired during the 20s and the 20th century, had a special meaning in Mexico when it was used to vindicate the autonomy of the university. That autonomy was understood as a special type of sovereignty that, as of 1968, was questioned, but is still nowadays a model for universities. Ever since, the word had been used in the neighborhoods and the towns with a different sense, one that foresaw what would happen. The 1985 earthquake in Mexico City created many popular initiatives that surprised everyone. In the search for words that could speak of the new social and political reality that had being created because of that earthquake, the word autonomy was united to a renewed notion of civil society to define a new semantic of social transformation. While that was happening in the societies of the lower classes in Mexico and other places, another version of autonomy started being created in Latin America, the Leninist version that was adopted in Nicaragua and other parts. They see the specific way of having a governmental order in which there is a decentralization of the autonomous regions, of the vertical power systems that defines the organization of the state. Even though this notion is in bankruptcy and it is against the autonomic efforts that come from below, it's still current, even with a new administration in Mexico. The proposal of autonomy that comes from the original peoples and is extended further is trying to recover faculties and competencies that were taken away from the times of the colony to freely dispose of their own political and legal spaces where they can practice their way of life and government. This notion is redefining free determination to make it mean the freedom to freely determine oneself in our own spaces and to determine along with other peoples and cultures ways of communicating or communing based on intercultural dialogue. And this dialogue has to transcend the logos, the totalitarianism, and the domination of one culture over the rest, and it will have a new horizon in a political design that won't be that of the nation-state. This notion of autonomy came from the original peoples, but it can be applied to other social groups or peasant groups. And as a matter of fact, this is what's been happening. The paths that are nowadays being undertaken with this notion is what I'm referring to. It's a recreation of autonomy in Latin America that is promoted by different groups. And it is at the same time a utopia that is mobilizing and organizing and is using political imagination to shape alternatives. There's been a rupture in the ideas and the reality that is taking a distance not only from the state apparatus but from the understanding of the state itself, in the search and understanding or the construction of other horizons. It is demanding for us to acknowledge the new practices that are theories and that have clear roots in different theoretical, practical traditions, but cannot be reduced by them. The autonomic preconfiguration abandons the posture that is thinking of the future with political initiatives in different types of promised land scenarios. This posture operates under the principle of separating ends and goals, which has been tragical for the left. Everything is a goal while the ideals are high, and in the meantime the present becomes a future is always postponed. Utopic force of autonomy doesn't come in a new reformulation of utopia, but it's in how it's rooted in the present as something that is not yet there, but it's already beginning to be. It requires inserting the result you're looking for in the search. Autonomy transcends all of the limits presented in the real society, even though it's embedded in it. It cannot be reduced by the logic of power and mentality of the patriarchy that covers it. The hope that is constructed like that is not a fantasy or a mere wish, but rather a hidden dimension of reality that characterizes the autonomic movements of Latin America. The tragic current times and the middle of the uncertainty that we live in and the hopelessness that is so extended, hope and surprise appear as the two main pillars of our transformation efforts. Hope is still the essence of popular movements, and it is clear that, as Illich has said, recovering it as a social force has become a survival matter. Acknowledging autonomy as a way of learning hope in the fight transforms it into a powerful lantern to lighten current reality. And even though autonomic fight has taken place in Latin America with more strength than in other places, the art of organizing hope defines the social fight of the 21st century around the world. The autonomic effort covers all the spheres of our daily lives to be embedded in the political and social life. Eduardo Galeano said this: in these times of global fear, those who are not afraid of hunger, they are afraid of eating. In spite of the fact that we have all of the technical means, economic means, so that nobody would go hungry, 1 billion people will go to bed with an empty stomach, and the rest of us were intoxicated by the things that we're giving in the food the market sells. But Via Campesina says this correctly. Under such circumstances, we cannot wait for the governments that are serving the capital to modify the state of things, or that Monsanto, Walmart, or other corporations, because of some moral epiphany, will start doing what's right, the opposite of what they've been doing. That is why Via Campesina says that we need to take the matter in our own hands and to define by ourselves what we're eating and producing it. And that's what we're doing. Small peasants, especially women, are nowadays feeding 70% of the planet's population, in spite of the fact that the agro-food business possesses and controls more than half of all of the food resources in the planet. Urban growing of food is extending everywhere, and even though with that certain reactionary tomatoes are also created who are prey of individualism and the current pattern, we still get revolutionary tomatoes that are the expression of a new society. So everywhere you'll find initiatives are helping us to heal ourselves from health and to combat the system that is making us sicker and sicker. We're abandoning their notions and their practices that are tempered by an industry of health that conquers all of the powers, dictates medical rules, and punishes those who don't. The autonomous ways of healing are not a marginal expression of a sect or something from the past, but contemporary creations of the new world. The educational system that was created with a patriarchal effort to control others doesn't prepare people for life and labor, but rather is providing obsolete curricula and is contributing to an inequality under the thrust of the educational reform everywhere. So different new ways are going back to the ancient wisdom traditions to learn in freedom with autonomy, and in ways as the ones that will be described tomorrow by Manish. The urban politics has been a spectacular failure, a devastating one in the consequences. It was defined as an idea of prosperity, development, in which you would see effort and zeal as a tide that will rise all the boats, but now we know that it is only working for the yachts. In order for us to resist the immense destruction it brings along it, nowadays a contemporary art of living is being renewed and is based in the austere renunciation of economic gender, the rejection of sentimentality, and the opening to surprise. As Illich would describe it, the autonomic fight is, above all, a path towards enjoyment, bliss, play, and love that have been so severely affected by the current regime. At the end of the day, all of this thing about degrowth and post-development that we are discussing here has a clear emphasis in the need of us to free ourselves from all sorts of coloniality that have been inserted in us, and that means that we need to recover ability to be joyful, to love, to enjoy. It means to denounce firmly how there's been a cancerous hypertrophy and a domination of the industrial means of production as the only ultimate way of worshipping as Ivan Illich described it, it means to unite our efforts to transform violence into a new getting along that has to be reconstructed. Federica and I and David will try to give you some examples of those ideas at 11:30 in the Paraninfo room at 11:30. Thank you.